So this weekend, we remember and reflect on those who have sacrificed their lives in the protecting of this nation. We'll often hear the saying, all gave some gave all. Memorial Day was first called Decoration Day. And while there's some debate, it was started in a town very close to where I grew up, Waterloo, New York, and it was first designated as the official birthplace of Memorial Day by President Lyndon Baines Johnson on May 26, 1966, and designated Waterloo, New York, as the official birthplace. Some say it was other places, but we'll go with Waterloo, New York. But it started with after the Civil War, several women would decorate the graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers. So many people for the United States sacrificed their lives for the freedoms that we have right here. Blood has been shed, and we remember. We reflect. We have memorials. The Bible has many moments where there are memorials, where there are times of remembrance throughout the Scriptures. Next week we will have In Remembrance of Me. We'll have communion. It's a remembrance. It's a memorial to remember. It's a remembrance of what Christ did on the cross. It's a remember of that promise. We see it in Genesis. We have the rainbow, which is a promise, but it's also a reminder. It's a reminder that God will not flood the entire planet again. It's a reminder. But today I'd like to look at a memorial that took place in the book of Joshua. The event takes place in chapter 4, but we're going to look at a little bit of context first before we get into this particular passage, so you sort of understand where this is coming from. So Israel was about to enter the Promised Land. Going back to Deuteronomy, at the very beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, we have one of the funnier passages. It's also sort of one of the facepalm passages I think of when Moses is writing this. So you have verse 1, and it starts off. Deuteronomy literally means the second law. It's the telling of the second law. And I just love the way that verses 2 and 3 read, because it just, like I said, it's funny and it's sort of like a facepalm. It says in verse 2, it says, "It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea." So from Mount Seir, which is where Mount Sinai is, to Kadesh Barnea, which was the location where Israel was going to go into the Promised Land. So Moses is writing that. It's only 11 days, less than 2 weeks from Mount Sinai to the place where they're supposed to go in. Verse 3, it says, "Now it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him as commandments to them." So you have this interesting statement. It only takes 11 days to go from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, which was back when they were supposed to go into the Promised Land, and they had a major detour. If you think your GPS is bad, well, here you have, it says now in the 40th year. So they've been wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. It only takes 11 days, turns into 40 years. Deuteronomy is where the second generation hears the law, and also the mantle is passed from Moses to Joshua. Moses had led the nation of Israel for over 40 years, and now it's going to be Joshua's turn. Moses would die at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and Joshua picks up with the preparation to cross the Jordan River at the beginning of Joshua chapter 1. Joshua chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, it says, "And the book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So the people are, they've had the same leader for 40 years, and there's been a lot of things that have taken place over those 40 years. For just a brief recap, what happens in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, is that the people are supposed to go into Kadesh Barnea, but they send 12 spies in. 10 of them come back and say, "Yeah, the land's great, but there's giants in the land, and we'll never get over it." And Joshua and Caleb are the only two that say, "Yeah, there's giants there, but God already told us that He's going to take care of that. He's going to take care of us when we cross over there." The people rebel against Moses, rebel against Caleb and Joshua, and they say, "We're going to go back. We're going to go back to Egypt. We're going to go out this way." And God says, "No, that's not going to happen." And so what's going to happen is that everyone that's over 20, at least all the men, which is the fighting age, are going to die in the wilderness. Anyone that's under 20 is going to live, be able to go into the promised land, and anyone else that's born. So God is commanding Joshua to cross the Jordan. Chapter 2 of Joshua, we meet Rahab, and we have the hiding of the spies, and they're preparing for this attack, this crossing over. And then chapter 3, we actually have the preparation and the crossing of the Jordan River. So let's read chapter 3 of Joshua. It says, "Then Joshua rose early in the morning and set out for the Acacia Grove, and came to the Jordan, and he and all the children of Israel lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and commanded the people, saying, 'When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and the Levites bearing it, then you shall set out from the place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way which you must go, for you have not passed this way before.' And Joshua said to the people, 'Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you.' Then Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, 'Take up the ark of the covenant, cross before the people.' So they took up the ark of the covenant, went before the people. And the Lord said to Joshua, 'This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as it was with Moses, so it shall be with you. You shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan.' So Joshua said to the children of Israel, 'Come here and hear the words of the Lord, your God.' And Joshua said, 'By this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Pezerites, the Gizrahites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take for yourselves 12 men from the tribe of Israel, 1 man from each tribe. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the water of the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters that come down from the upstream shall stand as a heap.'" So we have this setting up of what's happening. So for 40 years, Moses has been leading Israel. Everyone over 20 years, at least the men, have all died in the wilderness, except for Caleb and Joshua. The children who had left Egypt are now the adults with children of their own. So imagine if, what they had seen. Put yourself in their position. Say you were about 13 years old when Moses showed up in Egypt and said to the Pharaoh, "Let my people go." what you have seen, what you've experienced. You might have experienced slavery in Egypt. You saw the plagues that took place that eventually caused Pharaoh to drive them out. We saw the first Passover, the fleeing from Egypt, the Red Sea crossing, the parting of the waters, going to Mount Sinai. In Exodus chapter 20, you have the 10 Commandments, God actually speaking from the mountain, from heaven. Going to Kadesh Barnea, where the rebellion took place. Wandering the wilderness for 40 years. Hearing the reports from the spies. All these different things that you would have seen. Watching manna from heaven and quail from heaven coming down. Seeing the few battles and participating in these battles that took place in the wilderness. And then hearing in Deuteronomy the last message of Moses. All that's taken place in their lifetime for those. Could you imagine what those people were experiencing on that day? Thinking of everything that's transpired over their lifetime. They've watched their parents' generation completely die off, and now they're the adults, they're the ones with kids, and now they're finally able to cross over, but they've had to watch all this take place. So a lot has happened. This is all through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all the stuff leading up to it. So a lot has happened, and they've seen God work. Now here they are, once again, at the body of some water, as they were when they were children. So once again, they were teenagers, young adults, kids, and now they're in another body of water, and they're going to watch God work again. And what God has said to Joshua in chapter 3 is, I'm going to do something very similar to what I did with Moses in order to authenticate the message and the leadership of Joshua. So God is going to work this out. I think that after seeing their parents' generation die out and how God provided that, at least at the very start, they had a tad bit more faith than their parents' generation. They probably sort of we've seen God work in quite a few ways. One of the things that they talk about in there is that their shoes never wore out while they were in the wilderness. I mean, can you imagine that? You go to Boscov's, buy a pair of shoes, and it's good for 40 years. And so, they've watched a lot of things. They've been fed, they've been watered, they've won battles out in the wilderness, they've seen the Red Sea part, they've seen all this faithfulness of God. And so here they are at the Jordan River, ready to cross it. And the priests that have the Ark of the Covenant, the Levites, they go into the Jordan. So they're commanded to go into the Jordan River, to take that step of faith. They're the ones that have to take that first step of faith. They actually have to go into the water. There's no parting before anybody goes in. They actually have to go into the water. And we learn here in this passage too that it's at flood stage. All right, so it's, that's a step of faith. You have the priests that are going into this flooded river before it's going to do anything. So Joshua commands them to take the Ark of the Covenant and go in there. So in verse 14 it says, So it was, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan, when the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and those who bore the Ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the Ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest. So it's at flood stage. It's harvest time. And the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap as far away as Adam, the city that is beside Zenton. And the waters that went down into the sea of Arabia and of the Salt Sea, so the Dead Sea, we've seen it in pictures when I've done my presentation, were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. And then the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. All Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. All right, flood stage. The water's back up. It's not mud, it's dry ground. Joshua makes a point to illustrate that it's dry ground. He keeps on saying it's dry ground. You're not walking through mud. It's dry ground. It was flood stage, now it's dry ground. So you have the priests, they have to go into the water first, and then, can you just imagine this? All this water just backs up and just keeps going off, and it just cuts off the flow that's going down the south. All that water backs up, and it just goes way upstream. So the priests have the Ark of the Covenant standing in where the Jordan River had been, and every while now it crosses over. Now, we're talking about a lot of people, probably, over 100,000 people that are crossing. Because we see over in verse 13 of chapter 4, it says, about 40,000 prepared for war. So if there's 40,000 men that are preparing for war, how many women, how many children, how many older people that can't necessarily prepare for war? So there's 40,000 people that are preparing for war. So there's at least 100,000 people that are crossing over this area. So can you imagine that? So it says there's all these people going over. There's all the people that crossed over. But before the river closed, God had one last task. So God tells Joshua, and this is coming into beginning in chapter 4, verses 1. It says, and it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourself 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you shall take a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in the time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, where it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever. So God tells Joshua to get 12 men, one from each tribe, to go out into that dry area of the Jordan and take 12 stones. And these aren't small little pebbles. This is hey, look at this. Look at these cool little stones. These are massive stones. He tells them to carry them on their shoulders. So these are big stones. So they're going to go build something from that. So verses 6 and 7, it says, this will be a sign among you. And the Hebrew word can also be translated as a banner, or a reference point, or a display, or a reminder. So this is a reminder. So this may be a reminder among you. And the reason this is a reminder is when your kids ask you later, or their kids later on, their grandkids, what do these stones mean to you? That's the question. What do these stones mean to you? Verse 7, he says, this is a reminder of what God did, what the miracle was of the Jordan, that God moved the waters back and had us cross over on dry land. So he says, then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. He says this is a reminder. This is memorial. These stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. The Hebrew word literally means a remembrance or a record. So it's a way to remember, in remembrance of what happened there in the Jordan River. Before the river closed, before the first battle, before the second generation was circumcised in chapter 5, God wanted a reminder, a memorial set up, not to worship, it's not an idol, but as a reminder for that generation and the generations to come. Because so often we forget what God has done. And God wanted it to be a reminder. Going down a little bit further, it says in verses 15 through 24, it says, Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched dry ground, that the water of the Jordan returned to the place and overflowed all the banks as before. So we have the priests are commanded, this is a long period of time. Can you imagine moving 100,000 people and you're standing there with this box for who knows how long as all these people cross over. Then they go out and get the stones and bring it back. All this takes place before they're commanded to come out of the Jordan. As soon as they're out of the river area, the whole river goes back into place and starts flowing. So they returns as before. Verse 19, it says, Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped at Gilead on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they had took from the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. And he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, When your children ask their fathers in times to come, saying, What are these stones? Then you shall say to the children, you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we crossed over. And then all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord, that he is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So Joshua asked the same question that he asked back in in verses 6 and 7 of this chapter. The same question. When your children ask you, when your children ask your father in a time to come, what do these stones mean? You will answer them that Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry ground. God dried up the waters of the Jordan. God had also done this for the Red Sea, which some of them had seen that as well. God did this for the Red Sea. And the reason for all this is that all the peoples of the earth may know of the Lord, that they may know him. You'll let your children know that Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry land, that all the people of the earth may know the hand of the Lord. This was pointing to God. God wanted it to point back to him. This wasn't something that Israel was doing. This was something he was doing. And so everything was pointed to them. So these stones are just ordinary rocks that they pull out of the Jordan. They're nothing special. But they represent the power of God and his provision and his care. This Memorial Day, we'll see several stones. We'll see graves of men and women that had given their all for our nation. When kids ask, what do these stones mean? We should tell them about the men and women who sacrificed their life for the freedoms that we have in this country. One other thing when I look at this passage that I glean from this in Joshua is, what stones am I setting up? What stones are you setting up? These stones that are here in Joshua, and it says that that they were still there to the day that the particular account was written, that they were still there. These stones were a conversation starter. They gave an avenue to point the younger generation to God. What stones in my life point people to Christ? What stones in your life point people to Christ? When your children or anyone comes up to you and asks you, why do you go to church? Why do you pray? Why do you read the Bible? Tell them of the amazing work that God has done for you. These stones were to point people to the amazing work of God. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. What stones have you set up as a memorial or as a conversation piece in your life that will get people to ask you the questions when they come and they ask and they say, what did this mean to you? So this Memorial Day, we remember the stones of those who paid the price of freedom with their blood. We also think about how each one of us can have stones to point people to the cross of Jesus Christ, who paid the price for eternal freedom with his blood. Let's pray. Dearly Father, once again I thank you so much for the men and women who gave their all, that are still giving their all. In Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, for those that have given their lives in Germany, in Italy, in Japan, in the Philippines, and even on our own soil. Lord, I thank you so much for the men and women, for everything that they have sacrificed, so that we can be in a nation where we can proclaim Jesus Christ, where we can talk freely, where we can move about. So many places in the world do not have those freedoms, and I thank you so much for those that gave all. I thank you, Lord, that your Son also gave all. Not for the freedoms of the Declaration of Independence or the freedoms of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, but eternal freedom from the bondage of sin, from the slavery of sin. And it was paid with his blood. Lord, help us as we go about our lives to make markers, to make memorials, to make stones that will show people the mighty work, just like those stones were a conversation piece for the nation of Israel, that when children went by those stones and they asked their parents, what do these stones mean to you? They could tell of the mighty work of God with the parting of the Red Sea, the parting of the Jordan River, walking on dry ground, and the giving of the promised land. Lord, we have so much to offer this world because we have the message of hope. We have the message of freedom that's in Jesus Christ. Help our lives to be a memorial stone that points people to Jesus Christ. That when people ask us why we are the way we are, we point people to the truth. Lord, help us to be about our Father's business in this week to come. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.